we have two very special co-hosts with us today. We've got Brian Lovies, who's the Director of Product Management and Customer Care with IBM. That's my first guest. Welcome, Brian.
Ray, Jim, it's nice to see a fellow Lovies combo here today. I've never had that happen before.
Yeah, but I come before you alphabetically. There you go. So there you go. So welcome, Brian, and we've got Will Gage as an associate VP with York University. So welcome, Will.
Thank you so much. And I'm not lovable.
Yeah, we'll gauge that later. Did you?
Thank you for having me.
I slid that in. There you go. Okay. So thanks a lot, guys. We're going to start our discussion, and this is I think something that's of importance to everybody is how we can deal with customer care, how we can create that. And never mind just customers, and we'll talk about that. It's really a service experience that we're talking about, and regardless, of where we are, we share some common challenges and I hope some common benefits of being able to tackle this in this modern world, where we really do need to engage and create excellent experiences, whether we're in education or consumer electronics. It doesn't matter. The linking and the creating of that service experience in our digital world is probably one of the biggest challenges we're going to face over the next several years in there. So welcome. I'm going to start this out with a question to you, Will, in there. And I think the basics or the background of us trying to get a great customer experience is also rooted in this idea of digital transformation. Digital transformation creates some challenges and some opportunities. I think that's fair. But I think also it's what we're all going through. And I think it's fair to say with all of us that this has been accelerated by the pandemic. So what are the drivers of your digital transformation? Can we start with that, just as sort of a foundation piece?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks, Jim. There's no doubt that the pandemic accelerated our digital transformation as teaching and learning moved out of the lecture hall of the classroom online with the pandemic. And that was sudden, that happened so fast. But by way of a little bit of background to that, we're a large university, 55,000 students, around 7,000 staff, right?
Just a couple, yeah.
Just a few, and it's not just large. It's a complicated place, and further, it's a complex place. And so I would say probably like most large organizations of a nature like this, and I expect that IBM would be similar, is you're trying to help people have more of a personal experience, whether it's in their student life and their experience, or whether it's as an employee working at an organization, have that personal experience. Many of us, probably most, if not all of us, have gone to university or higher ed somewhere, or worked in a large organization like an IBM. And it's too easy to feel like a number. I'm just a number at a big place. That's not what we want. We want a personalized experience for everyone. But before I stop here with this little bit of an introduction, I want to say that I'm not an IT guy, actually. I'm here talking with you all about, I almost said intellectual property. No, not intellectual property, IT, and artificial intelligence and machine learning and these kinds of things. I'm a neuroscientist and a biomechanist by training, not an artificial intelligence.
You're not a really smart guy, is what you're saying. You're just a neuroscientist only. Yeah. Okay.
No. And so I want to I will make mistakes as I'm describing this, what we're doing in terms of the words I use, but I hope Brian will correct me quickly. We got on this work long before the pandemic, actually, because we are such a big place, and we know that the experience that our students have whether it's just generally in relation to their relationship with the university or in their curriculum, in their classes. We want it to be excellent. So how do we do that when we have that many students who all have different needs, questions, they need advice, how to navigate the world at this university or any university. And who do they go to? They go to student advisors. But for such, we only have roughly, and this is not just a uniquely York University thing, it's across the sector. We don't have enough people to be able to provide, personalized advice to 55,000 people. We have about 100 student advisors. So the challenge became, how do we make a personalized experience for people through that lens at scale with consistency and, the right answers at the right time. So we've been working on a project we've been developing with, in collaboration with IBM that we call Savvy. And I'm sure we'll be able to talk more about that throughout this discussion.
I'm sure we will in there. So that's, and just give us a little more, your digital transformation. What's driving that in these days?
Oh, gosh. Universities are awash in data, and I think historically we haven't done a great job of understanding how one set of data might relate to another set of data. So we have information about the student themselves and their background, their history, who they are, where they come from, some of that personal information. And we have information about the curriculum that they're in, the program that they're in, what the curriculum is that they're studying. We have different resources across the university that the students will engage with. But, those information sets, those data sets are kind of siloed, isolated from one another. And as we're trying to continuously improve the student experience, it became readily apparent that we need to be able to know our students better. If we want to personalize an experience, then your experience as a student should be shaped by, for instance, what faculty or what program you're in. You might not need the same kind of information or the same information if you're a student in a humanities program versus a biology program, or if you're on our Kiel campus versus our Glendon campus or our new Markham campus that's being built right now. So we need to bring all of the information that we have about a student together so that we can make sure that they're getting the right information at the right time when they're asking for it. So the digital transformation is I think, in large part about trying to provide the best service that we can, create a platform for continuously improving the service that we provide for our students, and creating the experience that I think they want, they expect, their families, their parents expect, and that we expect of ourselves to be able to provide.
Yeah. So just recapping this in there, a huge organization,
Mm-hmm.
many people that you're servicing in there, never enough staff, never enough resources, trying to create a personal experience, make people feel like they're not just a number, engage them in what are, I presume, are pretty complex interactions. Maybe you can elaborate on that a little more, but just registering for a class or changing a class is not just as simple as, we click, we're done, right? I mean, these seem simple, but if anybody's ever run this,
we don't want it to be just a click and you're done. Actually, if it was just a click and you're done, we wouldn't have dug deep enough with the student to understand why. What's the reason you want to drop this class or change this class? Might be great reasons. I'm sure it is a great reason. But if we don't have enough human resources, enough people to actually talk to the students and dig into this, get deep with them. It's trying to understand what the challenges are that they're faced with and why they want to make these decisions, or if they even understand why they're making these decisions, then we can't get to the bottom of it. We need the capacity to get to the bottom of it, right? So for instance, with the product, hate to call it a product, but okay, for lack of a better word at the moment, with Savvy, with IBM's help, what we've done is create, an opportunity for students to engage with us through the auspices of student advising. And if they say, they want to change a course, they want to drop a class, which they can just speak into Savvy and say, I want to drop a class. Then what a human would do is say, okay, well, let's dig into that. What's going on? Why do you want to drop the class? Savvy can do that, does do that with our students. So, I think you raised a great example, Jim, of, just click a button and drop a class. We don't want that. We want to know what the students are thinking about and what's driving their motivations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So all of this, and hopefully we use data to help us with this experience, but you're awash in data. I don't know, Brian, we said, this was a unique case. It was university. Sound unique to you? There's a lot of common problems that we all have, regardless of how we approach this, aren't there?
No, actually, he's unique in this problem. No So no, on a serious note, absolutely. I mean, I think you pinpointed, Will, all the core challenges, frankly, right? What I think ultimately is driving this is nobody wants to wait, right? A lot of this, right? And I think in the case of your personalization story, and people want to understand whether it's a customer churning, right, or a customer abandoning a self-service app, right? I think they're similar in terms of why they want to drop a course and trying to dig into why, because that person on the other end is important to you. And to your point, there's not enough humans out there to do the service. And the process to get to a human is painful, right? Because what do you have to do, right? You have to get physically in your car and drive somewhere, right? Or you typically have to call a 1-800 number, right? When you start going down the 1-800 number route, what do? You end up in this sort of robotic menu. Maybe you got to the wrong menu, have to hang up, call back again, and do all those sorts of things. I think what's driving a lot of this is just society in general, right? Wants to self-serve, wants to do things themselves. And I mean, even now, how many of us have tried to fix something around their house that you would have not dared tried, 15 years ago, because YouTube has come up with, hey, I can fix that sink, that bathroom, that toilet, right? So I think there's a broader trend in my mind just around, this concept that people don't want to wait. They want to be able to do things really quickly. And I also think there's this concept you just said around, if that person's trying to drop a class, I think there's more to it that I need to dig into, right? And I think that's a big part of it, right? And I think, frankly, we're just scratching the surface on personalization. But yeah, no, it's this concept of I don't want to wait.
Yeah, and a huge opportunity to learn from that interaction. That's what I picked up from Will was, it's not just, this is an opportunity. We always think of it as a cost, right? That serving a customer, engaging with them is a cost. It's not just a cost. It's an opportunity to learn from each encounter with them, to get better, to be more profitable, to do things better, to serve people. I mean, I spent a great deal of my career as a consultant going and talking to people's customers and then going back and telling them what their customers said. Mm-hmm. And because they felt they had these barriers in there. And I think this is a great piece there. Let's talk a little bit about it. I don't want to admire the problem totally, but I did want to fix it in place and say, here's where we are. You did a couple of things with Savvy. Do you want to just give us a little brief description of it, just to give us a foundation for what it is? It's a cool idea.
Yeah. Well, as we were getting into it, right at the very beginning, I had a sense with my colleagues here at the university as to what the problem was. What was our business problem? What are we trying to fix here? And in part, it's what you made me think, Jim, when you're talking about the problem. It's much cheaper to keep a customer than it is to get a new one, right? I mean, I think that's true.
Well, by a long shot, yes.
Yeah, yeah. And so what we're very interested in as an institution, and like most, I was about to say like most businesses, we don't think of ourselves as a business. It's a bit of a different conversation maybe we get into, but like any organization, we want to attract people to engage with us, and then we want to keep them. And what will drive a person away? I mean, any number of factors, but many of those factors are we do have some influence over. And the ones we have influence over drive much of the experience that they have with us. And so what we really wanted to be able to do is understand what the students need to know, what they are asking about. And so we went through a process of engaging with our community, with our student advisors, some of our faculty, but a lot of students to say, you know, what is on your mind? What could we do better? And how could we deliver this to you better? Mobile first was clearly the direction to take this. You know, my own 3 kids, you know, from 24 to 11. Phones are ubiquitous in our house. The 2 older ones are university students, always on their phone. I spend way too much time on my own phone. But if I want to get an answer to something, regardless of what it might be about, I go to my phone. Students always have their phone. It's handy, it's available for them. And I don't want to assume that every student has a phone and the data resources to use the phone like that. But I think it's a safe bet to say the vast majority do. And so mobile first was the way to go. So a student walking across campus has a question that comes to mind. They can ask it right away. You know, where's this, where's my next class? What building is it in? Where's the closest bathroom? You know, how do I drop a course? I'm thinking about dropping a course. You know, well, it's on my mind. I'll just ask Savvy. What's that all about? You know, so we wanted to be able to provide our students with 24/7 access to this kind of a resource, and that drove the need. You know, we identified our problem, which was that students needed accurate information when they felt they needed it. As Brian suggested, you know, maybe people don't really want to wait too long. I get that, especially when something just flies into your head and you can just Google an answer, or, you know, maybe in our case now, we want the name Savvy. It's a noun, obviously. We would like it to become a verb. You know, I just, you know, hold on a second. I'm not going to Google that answer. I'm going to Savvy that answer and figure it out. So we have this ubiquitous access to helping students understand the answers to the questions that they've got, what they can expect from us.
I think though, can I just interject, Jim, just for one quick
Sure,
second?
yeah, please.
I think the mobile web thing is kind of interesting, right? Like in my mind. And so I think the pattern that I'm sort of seeing, the places that make a lot of sense where it's mobile first are exactly the situations you just kind of outlined, right? Like I'm a student, trust me, I got an 18-year-old son and a 15-year-old daughter, and I can't get the phone out of their hands, right? So those types of things make complete sense. And I see things like banking and other areas where a mobile app, where I'm going to use it regularly. Where we haven't seen mobile as much, ironically, is where people don't use the app much, right, on a particular phone, right? So there's other industries that, hey, listen, I'm not going to download their app. I'm not going to use their app all the time. So probably doesn't make a lot of sense for me to kind of invest in that model. But where the mobile first stuff has really, I think, taken off is exactly what you just said around students who live ubiquitously on their phone, right? Or situations like banking, which probably most of us have. But other industries, probably less so. And depending on the circumstance, you know, maybe a web experience, because they're sitting on their laptop, is a more appropriate one, ironically. It's something we're kind of seeing as an interesting trend. And because even from a product standpoint, we got to make decisions on where we kind of invest and don't invest and things like that. But that's kind of what we're seeing across the board.
Yeah. And one of this leads to a question we're getting on the different e-channels that you're using. You've mentioned, Will, you can talk to Savvy, so you can just.
We're building out that functionality currently. Right now, it's a text-based communications savvy. And so I think I might have, said the words, just ask savvy, but I think I kind of meant it with my thumbs, ask savvy with my thumbs. Soon to be by voice, yeah.
But looking at that different ways that people can access the system, the mobile first, obviously, some of the things you talked about, Brian, and having a good web experience are probably very important. I know that in there, so you've got a number of different ways that you can attack the system in there. So what have been the results so far?
Yeah, we've had some great results so far. We've been really happy.
In terms of the reaction of people, though, I mean, to these different channels.
Right? The adoption on campus amongst our students and among other groups on campus as well, but predominantly among the students. We rolled this out. We started rolling it out a little over 2 years ago, which coincided serendipitously with the beginning of the pandemic. So it was, fortuitous. Some people said we were lucky having this in place. I don't agree that we were lucky. If luck favors the prepared, then that was more of the situation. We had it ready to go. We were able to roll it out to our first year students. So now our first and second year students, and soon our third year students, will have come to York and not known a York without Savvy. So obviously within 4 years' time, most of our students will have not known York without Savvy. And this will be the primary way that they're engaging with the university from a student advising perspective. And I didn't have the numbers close at hand this morning, so I pulled them up, Jim, so that I could talk to you about
I love numbers.
Yeah, me too. So far, at the time that this report was written for me, we had almost 18,000 unique students use Savvy over the past 2 years.
Wow.
So that represents, not quite half of our student body, which you might expect first and second year students to represent, but getting pretty close. So almost 18,000 different people have used Savvy. We've, from what I understand, Savvy now accurately answers more than 90% of any questions that are asked of Savvy. With all due respect to my human colleagues, I'm not sure that 90% accuracy was ever necessarily obtained. Like any large organization, you ask one person, you get an answer. Ask another person, you get a different answer, sometimes conflicting. But really importantly, Jim, over 47% of the questions that have been asked of Savvy happened outside of normal business hours. So that's a huge benefit. So, I think Brian mentioned the 1-800 number paradigm earlier. There's, but after 5 o'clock, there's no one to answer that 1-800 number necessarily, but Savvy's there.
Yeah. 1-800 wait till tomorrow. Yeah. So this is a supplement. You obviously still have some live people answering questions, stuff like this, but has that taken a real load off of people? And
yeah, it hasn't reduced their workload. The workload of those 100 student advisors, it hasn't been reduced. But what they're telling us is that the nature of their work is qualitatively different. So at the beginning of this project, when we first started to explore the extent of the business problem, we learned that something like 80% of the questions that any given student advisor received were the same question over and over and over, slightly different words, but the same question. And it tended to go by the time of year in the academic calendar. And those were not hard questions to answer. They're simple transactional kinds of things. Savvy deals with those, no problem. Doesn't blink on those, and students don't wait in line to get those answers. So what's happened as a function of that is the student advisors are dealing with more of the deep, intractable kinds of problems. If we come back to the should I drop this course or I want to drop this course conversation, a student advisor, when it eventually gets to them, can spend some time now really digging into the issue with the student. Maybe there's a family related issue happening. Maybe there's a financial thing happening. Maybe they're sick. They have to, they're responsible for putting food on the table and don't have time. Whatever the case may be, the student advisors can now dig down into it, and Savvy will start that process, but then bring them to a student advisor. Don't quote me on this, although I know we're being recorded right now. I'm pretty sure the functionality is either there or it's about to be there, that Savvy can suggest an appointment with a student advisor and book that appointment for the student.
Cool. Yeah. One of the things you brought up, and we got some good questions happening too, so we'll get into those. But just one thing, you talked about the consistency of an answer, and I that drives me crazy. I don't know, Brian, if this comes up in your world a lot as well. One of the worst things you can do, you could say I don't know to me on a customer call or information call, but I'll find out. But the one I hate is where you call up one time, you get one answer, and you call up and you get another answer. You just want to die, in there. So this consistency of answers, are you getting that's improving the service as well?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I remember it as an undergraduate. When I was an undergraduate, I would go to the place to get advice, and I would ask one day and get an answer, and I'd phone back or go in the next day to ask the same question because I wasn't quite sure, and lo and behold, get a completely different answer. Hear about our students having that same experience. We've probably all had that experience in one way or another. And what Savvy does is it provides the same answer, because it's an answer that's been validated by our team of people, validated as correct. It reliably provides the same answer. And one of the really interesting things that happened as we were creating Savvy and teaching Savvy about York is that as we were going through our own websites, we would find from time to time directly conflicting information. So you could Google something to ask about student advising at York and get an answer, and then find a different answer on a different web page to practically the same question. So the process of creating Savvy actually drove us towards making sure that we had actual consistent information that we were providing, because you've taught before, Jim. You know the value in saying I don't know when a student asks, because they can detect when you're fibbing, when you're
darn them.
I'm the first one to say, you know what, I don't know. I'll get back to you. That's an excellent question. But if you try and make something up, you'll be wrong. They'll know you're wrong, and they'll have a bad experience. And so we're able to fix a lot of that through the creation of Savvy.
Wow, yeah. Brian, in your experience, same thing? The consistency, do you hear about consistency of answers? What are the key drivers?
We hear that a lot as one of the benefits, right? It's one of the ones you don't think you see immediately when you think about these solutions, but we've seen it from another number of customers say the exact same thing, right? Humans are inconsistent, and that you can build these systems to be, frankly, branded the way you wanted, personalized the way you wanted. Like, there's a lot of advantages to be able to do that, right? And then frankly, in some of the other customers we see, there's so much turnover in contact centers, right? Which is one of the biggest problems, right? So you get a lot of, challenges in the contact center around turnover. And so these types of things can be a lot more consistent. The only other thing I was going to mention here is, I think some of the AI pieces that come into play here is, right, even if the machine, the same way as humans, if we're not sure, right, what are you actually asking me? Let me kind of clarify, because I wasn't sure what you asked me, right? frankly, the machines work the same way, right? We enable things like automatically clarifying. So, somebody as a student or a customer come into one of these systems and says, ask something. The classic one I always kind of talk about in the space of banking is like, I'm traveling to Rome, right? Somebody may enter that in, and we've seen that example. What do you mean by that? What are you trying to do? Are you trying to set up a travel alert? Or you want a credit card that's great when you go there? And so I think what's neat about the machine learning is that it's kind of mimicking, right, how humans interact in a lot of ways, in more of a systematic way, but in a very similar way, right? What it doesn't understand, it says, hey, let me suggest, are you trying to get a travel alert, or are you trying to get a new credit card for your trip, or increase your limit, or whatever it might be, right? Anyway, so I think there's kind of two angles to that. There's the consistency, but when you said I don't know, there's also like the machine that might not know, and there's this sort of clarification angle as well.
If I can jump in for a sec, Jim, what Brian just said is really something that I learned about. I was so surprised to learn this about AI and machine learning, that it can tell you the answer, but it's real. It really shines in understanding the question. That's
tell me more about that. What's Brian? Well, tell me more about that. That sounds really important, actually. Machine language, understanding the question.
Well, it was a surprise to me. Like I didn't know that's where the real power was, and I'll defer to Brian on this. Absolutely, he knows this better than I do. But
that's where a lot of that's where a lot of the changes happen in the space, right? Like people have probably heard of the word deep learning, right? So there's a lot of new approaches that came around several years ago. And I think they have, and by the way, we got our whole IBM research team, and we're not the only ones, right, who are constantly innovating in that space, right? And so the whole idea is, with these deep learning algorithms and other approaches, that you can really start to detect with only a few examples what the user is actually trying to do. So a lot of the way these systems works is, right, let's use your drop a class example, right? Students may say that in a million different ways, right? In some really strange ways, right? And so the idea though, and this is where the power of AI comes in, you give it a few examples, right? It can start to detect other examples because it knows that this word's related to this word and the things that it's read. Like that's where a lot of the power comes into, right? And then the other thing that gets kind of fun about this is then, now that I know you're trying to drop a class, well, now I got to collect a bunch of information from you, right? I need to know, well, right, which class are you trying to drop and things like that, right? So then you get into this nice sort of back and forth experience. And there's even a lot of AI in extracting out those objects or nouns or whatever that you actually need in these circumstances, right? So yeah, I think it's really interesting. I think there's a lot of opportunity to continue to drive improvements in that to get better and better and better. And frankly, over time, the labeling of data that we just talked about, meaning giving it a few examples, that's all you need to do, right? And in the future, we kind of see the everyday usage, Will and Jim, of like people coming into the system and they've asked this question, they got this response. They may have tapped on another response, like those whole learning and everyday usage events. We think there's a world out there where, you can kind of let it kind of set out to the wild and the thing is just going to automatically learn on its own. We already have elements of that in the product today, but we think there's a huge opportunity in the future to drive. And of course, that'll drive more improvement in terms of the experience of the end users, and it's going to weigh down the support and maintenance of building and maintaining these things as well.
Yeah, as I understand it today, if there's something that Savvy doesn't understand, a human being has to go in and teach it. Here's the question, or the intent, as people call them, and here's the answer. And let's match those two. And the next time something similar to that gets asked, this is likely the answer. And then maybe soon the human being will need to go in and
that's the whole goal, right? That's the whole goal. You kind of, you bootstrap these things with, a few examples, but then with everyday usage of your students coming in, in some cases, the system will show multiple options on purpose so that the system, hey, did you mean this, drop a class or add a class? I wasn't sure what you meant. Mm-hmm. They pick drop a class. They'll start to learn from all those events where this thing just naturally, right, gets better and better with everyday usage, right? And I think that's where the trick is for a lot of these systems to just naturally get better. Now, obviously that won't help with, I want to modify a class and I haven't built any experience around that. I obviously can't deal with those because you don't have the content or the scenario in behind. But yeah.
Wow. Yeah. I want to zero around a couple of questions, and I think we've covered them in the discussion, but I just want to, because the people are, thank you to Tarek, Kira, Ryan, and everybody out there. We get a lot of questions in there. So, and just go quickly clip through them, and I'll pick up the rest of the discussion as well. 90% of the questions answered virtual assistant savvy, thereabouts, and we're recording it, but we're not going to write that down. Well, but you're getting the vast, overwhelming majority of your questions are answered. But how long did it take you to get there?
I'm fairly confident in answering this question, Jim. From the time that Savvy launched, which was about 2 years ago, from what I understand, we started off somewhere around 78 or 79%. Questions were answered accurately. I think that was probably a function of a lot of time spent teaching Savvy some of the basics. I mean, we can anticipate what a lot of the questions would be. And then over the intervening 2 years since then, it's gone up to 90%.
Wow, that's a high, but I think that reflects the consultation you did before and the thinking it through and working with the student advisors and everybody in there. I presume that had a lot to do with why you could start it with such a high level.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I see another question popped in. Like, was that a lot of time? I don't know if it was a lot. I don't have anything to benchmark that against. So in our world, I don't think.
Brian, you see lots of time.
We'll be able to help other universities get there quicker.
That seems
what did you sort of use as the time frame for the initial launch? Did you give I can't.
Well, it's been about 2 years since the initial launch, and the number of students using it has been growing consistently. And so the number of questions asked or the number of interactions with Savvy has been growing exponentially.
Yep. So I think in terms of like what I see, our customers do in terms of time to implement, my recommendation, first of all, is, 2 months to 3 months. Right, because a lot of the time, like with these systems, is you want to see oftentimes you don't know exactly what people are going to ask, right? So until you set the thing live, once you set the thing live, then you go, okay, now I know what they're really asking, right? And so there's a lot of analytics that you can derive out of that to figure out, you weren't, training it to do this, this, and this, right? So one of the things I always recommend with clients is, implement sooner rather than later, right? Now every client is different, and there's different situations and use cases. I've seen with COVID, by the way, certain institutions go live in 3 days, right? But I've also seen clients take 6 months, right? So, but my recommendation is typically, if you can do it as quick as possible, but 2 to 3 months is typically what I would recommend and see, right?
And speaking of opportunities for learning, we talked about natural language processing, or the ability for this to learn. There are other aspects of this, like understanding the sentiment of the question and things like that the opportunities there. Brian, that's a real opportunity level beyond just the factual piece of this, isn't it?
Yeah. Is that to me or to Will? Sorry, Jim.
Oh, to either one of you. I just let you talk a little, and Will in there. Just chime in there, buddy.
I mean, I think the interesting thing for me, is AI. So sentiment is certainly one piece, but AI is used throughout. Like I think people think it's just on the natural language processing up front, right? I think and we're already doing it today, right? It's used all over the place, right? So like we autocorrect, right? Somebody spells something wrong. We've got AI in there that automatically corrects that word. So if I said, how many weeks is it going to be till I get my course outline? Weeks, you may have spelled WEAKS. It'll automatically just correct those things naturally. And it's not like some rule-based thing. That's AI that our research team built, right? So there's the natural language processing. There's understanding the objects and nouns we talked about. And I talked a little bit about like auto learning, right? So all of that's AI, right? So entirely the experience itself, whether you're clarifying or correcting spelling or understanding what's being said, like AI is being applied. Now, the trick for us is, we don't want Will to have to be an AI expert or a data scientist to be able to run that, right? So our goal in the product is to obscure all of that and make it just usable. Like anyone else who has an iPhone, I don't have an Android, so I don't know what the equivalent is, but we've all got in the new phones facial recognition, right? Well, that's AI. And what does Apple do, right? Well, let me see your face this way, then on the side, then down, then up. And you give it about 5 examples. And But you don't really have to be an AI expert, obviously, to get your iPhone set up, right? It's the same experience that we're trying to drive, right? It's AI under the covers. You got to give it some training to get going, but then once you've done that, away you go. Oh, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I think that's really important because, well, you started this conversation saying I'm not an IT guy. Well, yes, you are. We're about results. You know, I hope we're all about results, but it's this. You said this, Brian. We shouldn't have to. I mean, one of the promises of AI is we shouldn't have to be worrying about how it does it. We should be able to explore new potentials. And I wanted to get into this. Well, you talked about, because when we were chatting about this before this, you talked about sentiment analysis and where that could lead you with students and increasing that personal interaction with people. You remember that discussion we had on that?
Yes. Yeah. And I'll invite Brian to correct me when I use the wrong words here or use them the wrong way. But yeah, from what I understand, sentiment analysis is it can detect, the sentiment or the emotion in the words that are being spoken or typed, which I imagine sensing emotion in typed words where there's no intonation of the voice and so on and so forth is probably more difficult. But I understand as well, because I've read a couple of the studies, that there are robust academic studies that have examined the utility of sentiment analysis as through Watson at IBM, for instance, on detecting mental health issues that may be subclinical or just getting started, anxiety or depression in the written word, the written communication from the student to Savvy. Now, we're not there yet. That's one of the next things that we're tackling. Mental health is a huge issue globally, but in higher ed, mental health is a massive issue. Anxiety and depression are I'm not sure what it's common, put it that way. And what we're very concerned about in terms of helping students to have the best experience they can in university is helping them to thrive in university. And it's one of the most stressful times in a person's life. It's one of the most stressful times in a young person's life to date. You've moved away from home, perhaps. You're in and amongst all new people, a different place. And there's huge pressures on students, whether they're self-imposed or imposed by parents or just the culture that we're all in now, that seem to be driving the increased prevalence and incidence of mental health issues. That if we can detect early, just in the routine kinds of communications that Savvy has with students, that perhaps there's the beginnings of something that's happening, then maybe we can help to intervene early when it comes to any kind of illness. Now, I'm a doctor, but my kids remind me I'm not a real doctor, so I don't speak to this with kind of any kind of medical authority by any means. But I think it's understood that if we can intervene early, we have a better opportunity to help resolve the problem that the person's experiencing, get them help or whatever the intervention needs to be, and help them stay on track. So I think that's the direction that we're heading in. We've got some mental health experts on campus here who are engaged with us now. We'll be doing more work with IBM to help bring this kind of functionality into Savvy. And then we're also looking at ways to connect Savvy and the student advising piece to the curriculum delivery piece, so that we start to bring the whole student experience together, and that'll create more opportunities to better understand who our students are and what their challenges are. That just reminded me of something that I learned about Savvy from our data folks here on campus. One of the things, and I understand this happens at Google as well, Google Trends seems to demonstrate this, I think, but we're really finding out what is on the minds of our students across campus, of those who engage with Savvy, by the nature of the questions that are being asked. So I think there's some evidence to suggest that Google can predict where there's going to be influenza outbreaks or something along those lines. I'm not saying that we can do that with Savvy, but we get a sense of what the burning issues are in our community based on the questions that are being asked of Savvy. And I thought it's kind of a meta level way of looking at how Savvy is working and serving our students. It's pretty cool.
Two questions there. One, we both decided, well, that Brian's the smartest guy in the room, so we're gonna pound the hard questions to him. No, but we can talk about what data you're getting in. But there's a question coming up in here about security, and this obviously we're taking a lot of data in. There's and included on personal data on people. The security issue does that come up in your planning, Brian?
All the time. Right. So I think the specific questions about HIPAA, so we come with HIPAA compliant solutions around this. That's huge. But security is probably, I mean, we're IBM too, right? So a lot of the folks that we deal with have very heavy security requirements. The one thing we've taken very seriously too, there's a little less chatter about this in the last year or two, but like your data is your data, right? So a lot of I'll say other folks in the market will tend to use that data to go improve their models. We have other ways that we use that are that maintain the privacy of our clients to kind of do it. So I think it's not just the security of it, which there's a ton of in the product, right? Encryption in transit at rest and all sorts of other things. Data isolation, HIPAA compliance, ISO, SOC 1, SOC 2, go down the line. But I also think there's this privacy angle of we're not going to use your data to go and improve the models or test the models or anything else, right? We've got alternative means to do that. So I think it's absolutely critical. And we get into a lot of discussions with customers around the security side of the house.
Yeah. We're going to let everybody join in for a minute just as we wrap up in here.